In October 2019, my botanist working for Kew Gardens walked a standard urban tree survey route through the London borough of Hounslow, recording species, canopy spread, and trunk diameter at chest height. She was moving briskly, clipboard in hand, on a grey Tuesday morning, noting planes and limes and the occasional horse chestnut. Then she stopped. In a front garden on a residential street, not far from a bus stop and a row of takeaway shops, stood a tree she had not expected to find. It was roughly 8 meters tall, with a pale, furrowed trunk and a canopy of fan-shaped leaves that moved in the damp October air as something ancient and unclassifiable. She measured the trunk. The girth suggested it was at least 40 years old. It had been growing there, quietly, while the street was repaved and rerouted and made ordinary, and no one had recorded it. The tree was Ginkgo biloba. Ginkgo biloba. This is not a story about one overlooked tree on a suburban street. It is a story about what happens when an organism that outlasted the dinosaurs, survived mass extinction, and endured atomic catastrophe is introduced to the post-industrial cities of Northern Europe, and finds there, against all expectation, something that suits it perfectly. The pattern has been building for decades, and almost no one is paying attention to how far it has already gone. Ginkgo biloba is what paleobotanists call a relict species, the surviving member of an entire division of plant life that once spread across the northern hemisphere. Its lineage, Gingophyta, reaches back approximately 290 million years. At its peak, during the Jurassic period, ginkgo relatives grew on every continent. Dinosaurs foraged beneath their canopies. The Cretaceous extinction event that ended the dinosaurs began thinning the family, and by the Miocene epoch, roughly 5 million years ago, Gingophyta had retreated to a narrow pocket of central China, the Tianmu Mountains, and the Zhejiang province hinterlands, where the tree persisted in semi-wild populations, sheltered by Buddhist and Taoist monasteries whose monks regarded it as sacred. Western botany formally encountered Ginkgo biloba in 1690, when the German physician and naturalist Engelbert Kaempfer documented it during his time in Japan, where it had been cultivated by Buddhist monks for centuries. The first living specimen arrived in Europe at Utrecht Botanic Garden in 1730. British estate owners and botanical garden curators began acquiring the tree through the latter half of the 18th century, planting it initially as a curiosity, a living relic from a world that no longer existed. By the mid-Victorian era, it had become a fashionable statement tree for landed estates, valued for its strange silhouette and its vivid gold autumn colour. That phase of cultivation was slow, deliberate, and largely confined to private grounds. What changed the picture was the post-war expansion of municipal planting programs in the 1960s and 1970s, which began introducing ginkgo to urban streets as an ornamental species, and the later explosion of garden centre, retailing in the 1990s, which put saplings within reach of any homeowner with £30 and a Saturday afternoon free. Ginkgo biloba is a gymnosperm, which means it reproduces via seeds that are not enclosed in a fruit in the conventional flowering plant sense. The tree is dioecious. Male and female reproductive structures occur on entirely separate individuals. The male tree produces small, catkin-like pollen cones in spring. The female tree, if one grows nearby, can receive that pollen and produce seeds enclosed in a fleshy, pale yellow outer coating. That coating, technically the outer layer of the seed known as the sarcotesta, contains butyric acid, which gives fallen female seeds their notorious smell, often compared to rancid butter or vomit. For this reason, most nurseries and urban planting schemes in Europe stock exclusively male cultivars. Varieties such as Fastigiata, Tremonia, and Princeton Sentry, selected for their upright columnar form and their silence in reproductive terms. The tree grows more slowly than a lime or a London plane, typically adding 30 to 60 centimeters of height per year in urban conditions. But it is astonishingly tenacious. It tolerates compacted soils, atmospheric pollution, drought, and road salt. Its leaves are relatively resistant to fungal disease, and it has no significant insect pests in Britain, partly because the evolutionary defenses embedded in its chemistry are calibrated against insects that no longer exist in Europe. The species is capable of reaching 30 meters in height and living for well over 1,000 years. Specimens in Chinese temple gardens have been reliably dated to more than 1,400 years of age. The tree at Gu Tianmu Temple in Zhejiang Province is estimated to be between 1,400 and 1,500 years old, with a trunk circumference of over 15 meters. The most famous evidence of the tree's resilience came in August 1945. 6 ginkgo trees growing within 2 kilometers of the hypocenter of the Hiroshima atomic bomb blast survived. The surrounding city was obliterated. By the spring of 1946, those 6 trees were producing new leaves. They are still alive today. Stories like this are happening right now, and almost no one is covering them. If you want to keep finding the quiet ones that the news misses, subscribe. There is a new one every week. Dr. Peter Thomas, a woodland ecologist at Keele University, whose long-term research has focused on long-lived tree species in urban environments, has written extensively about ginkgo's performance in British cities. In his 2016 book on trees, and in subsequent field assessments, he noted that ginkgo's tolerance for urban conditions is not merely comparable to established street tree species. In some measurable respects, it exceeds them. It loses fewer trees per decade to storm damage, disease, and soil contamination than the London plane or the common lime. The Royal Horticultural Society currently lists Ginkgo biloba with an award of garden merit and explicitly recommends it for urban planting. The Woodland Trust's Urban Tree Database, updated in 2022, recorded a 34% increase in ginkgo registrations across England and Wales compared with the previous decade, a figure that reflects both new plantings and the retrospective recording of trees that had simply been there unnoticed. Natural England's street tree inventory, which surveyed local authority records across 34 council areas in 2021, identified ginkgo as one of the 10 most commonly planted new street trees in Greater London, the West Midlands, and Greater Manchester combined. The spread is not uniform, but it is geographically broad. In Edinburgh, the Royal Botanic Garden has maintained ginkgo specimens since 1843, and several have now seeded into surrounding parkland. In Bristol, the City Council's urban greening programme planted 120 ginkgo trees along the harbourside and along sections of the A38 corridor between 2017 and 2022. In the London Borough of Islington alone, the Street Tree Database listed 89 registered ginkgo specimens as of 2023, concentrated heavily around Angel, Highbury, and the edges of Highgate. In Birmingham, a single specimen in Cannon Hill Park has been growing since at least the 1930s, and its measured canopy now covers an area of approximately 280 square metres. A National Trust survey at Hidcote Manor Garden in Gloucestershire in 2020 identified a female specimen of ginkgo that had been presumed male for decades, producing viable seeds that had dispersed into adjacent hedgerow. And that last point introduces the complication. The near-universal assumption in urban forestry planning is that British ginkgo populations are sterile because only male cultivars are typically sold. But that assumption rests on nursery records that are incomplete. A 2018 study published in the journal Urban Forestry and Urban Greening, conducted across planted urban populations in France, Germany, and Britain, found that between 4 and 7% of ginkgo trees catalogued as male were in fact female, or were producing occasional fertile structures due to branch-level sex switching, a phenomenon documented in ginkgo and several other gymnosperm species. Where male and female trees grow within wind pollen range of one another, roughly 2 kilometers under favorable conditions, seed production can occur. The Sarcatesta-covered seeds are consumed and dispersed by foxes and certain corvids, both of which are extremely common in British urban environments. Confirmed self-seeded ginkgo seedlings have been recorded in London, Cardiff, and Leeds. The numbers are small, but the direction of travel is clear. There is no consensus on whether this constitutes a concern. The IUCN does not currently list Ginkgo biloba as invasive in any European context. Its slow growth rate and its specific germination requirements, it prefers freely draining, slightly acidic soils, mean it is unlikely to outcompete established native vegetation in woodland conditions. Some ecologists argue that a species this ancient, one that was genuinely native to the northern hemisphere before the glaciations removed it, deserves a different category of consideration than a plant introduced from another continent. It is not, in the strict paleo-botanical sense, alien to Britain. It is simply late returning. In November, in a residential street in any number of British cities, a ginkgo tree will be standing at the edge of its gold. The fan-shaped leaves will be coming down slowly, one by one, because ginkgo drops its entire canopy in a matter of days once the signal arrives, a brief gold carpet before the pavement cleaners reach it. The trunk will be pale and still. The roots will be moving through compacted clay at a rate most people would describe as imperceptible, finding the small gaps between cable ducts and curbstones, the loose patches between old tarmac repairs. It has been doing this in one form or another for nearly 290 million years. It watched the ferns grow and thicken and thin. It was there when the first flowering plants appeared and began their takeover. It stood in a Chinese valley while the glaciers moved north and did not reach it. It survived a nuclear detonation at 2 kilometers and put out new leaves the following spring. It does not hurry. It does not broadcast its intentions. It simply continues. And in the cities it is continuing quietly, in 1,000 front gardens and along 1,000 curb lines, in a country whose climate is warming by a rate of 0.28 degrees Celsius per decade, where milder winters are doing nothing to discourage a tree that has survived conditions far more dramatic than anything Britain is likely to offer. Share your thoughts below.